As the cars assemble on the start straight for this, our second tribute to that absolute doyen of private entrance, RRC Walker, Rob Walker, and his son's here. The dais is present for an address which is to follow, and this is a very, very special moment, Doug, isn't it?
It is actually. Rob was a very, very respected figure within the motor racing world, obviously, and as a private entrance, his racing team, RRC Walker Racing, based in Dorking in Surrey, actually achieved remarkable results. They won no fewer than 9 World Championship qualifying Grand Prix races between 1958 and 1968. It was the most extraordinary career for any private owner. He was helped, of course, by his great friend and #1 driver Stirling Moss until the end of Stirling's career here, so sadly in Easter Monday 1962. But subsequently returned to winning in Formula One with Joe Siffert in the Mediterranean Grand Prix of 1964 in a Brabham Climax and Brabham BRM. Goodness me, what am I saying? And ultimately in 1968, Joe Siffert won the British Grand Prix in their Lotus 49, Marcus, which we all remember.
Well, absolutely. It was one that, very sadly, I wasn't at, but one of the few I sort of missed at that sort of era, but a remarkable moment, spanning another era of Grand Prix racing, the 3-litre era, of course, which started in 1966. And the DFE era kicked off in 67, and continued 155 Grand Prix wins for the Cosworth DFE engine, the World Championship level.
Indeed.
But there's a sea of Walker blue and white beneath us, and the French blue of the Delahaye that started it all at Le Mans in 1939, Doug.
That's right. Rob shared the drive in that car at Le Mans in 1939 with Ian Connell, a close friend of his, and Ian Connell took the opening stage, the opening section of that race, starting at 4 in the afternoon. He drove till about 8 in the evening when Rob took over. And of course, Rob, being a properly bred gentleman, decided that 8 in the evening, it's dinner time. I think one should dress accordingly. And so he donned a dark suit and drove in the dark suit until later on that night. But then in the morning, the early morning, he thought it was only right and proper to change into Prince of Wales stripe.
Well, down on the grid, Toby Moody is with Ross Brawn.
Ross, you've been on some grids, but what about this one?
Very special. And when Lord March told me what he was doing, then I couldn't resist. So I thought this was my weekend off after a pretty busy Grand Prix schedule, but yeah, definitely couldn't resist this one.
Well, it's a weekend off. I mean, you've driven around Goodwood in a 250 short wheelbase on an autumnal day, not quite a summer's day, but an autumnal day. You were at Monza last weekend. Life must be pretty good.
No complaints. A very special time for me was a couple of years ago when Stirling actually drove me around the circuit in this car. And I must say, he was not hanging about. And that brought tears to my eyes. It was, and just thinking about that history, and I've got the Pathé News clip of when he won the race in 1960 in the car, and tripped as he walked up the steps to the podium. So fabulous memories of this car.
What was it like what's your memories of Goodwood? What are your formative memories of Goodwood? What got you on the historic side?
I've always enjoyed classic cars, and then as I got more into it over the years, then cars with history that had something going on. I've got some old veteran cars. I've got a steam car, and I've got a 1904 car I use on the London to Brighton, and sort of getting into the history of what they did, etc. And it's so opposite to what I do as a day job that it's a lot of fun.
But you're making history as well with your day job as well. I mean, it was a great race last weekend. I was glued to it. You must be pretty happy with that one.
It was a fantastic race, and we've been, I'll be honest, we've been fortunate with timing because we've got Ferrari and Mercedes knocking lumps out of each other, and that always helps. But I think we're making the most of it. Viewing figures are up, attendance figures at the track's up, the satisfaction of the fans at the track's up, so everything's going in the right direction. It's such a fabulous sport that we need to nurture it and make it even greater.
Singapore next. Who do you think might be top of the podium? I know it's a long shot question, but what's your hunch?
Well, you know, the great thing is you can't say. Today in Formula One, you couldn't honestly say who was going to win. Everyone thought Ferrari would win in Monza, and they didn't. And that's what's fantastic about Formula One today. So it's going to be red or silver. Red Bull might be in there. It's a track that might suit them a little bit more. So impossible to say, and I'm so glad I'm saying that.
Ross Brawn, once with a Ferrari, always with a Ferrari. Thank you very much. Great to see you.
Cheers. Thanks.
Well, that was Ross Brawn down there with his glorious Ferrari 250 GT Berlinetta, and the grid walk is now underway. A special grid walk, Doug?
Well, it's very special, isn't it, really, for the GRRC members, because they grew out of the Goodwood Supporters Association, which grew out of a pretty noisy, very vocal opposition group that was opposed to
Toby Moody has caught up with Sir
Three-time
Jackie Stewart.
Formula One world champion down here at the Goodwood Revival on the grid. Jackie, Stewart, you've been all around the world. You've been to hundreds and hundreds of Grand Prix, but Goodwood Revival, something very special, I'm sure, for you.
Yes, I've been coming here for very many years. I came here with my brother when I was about 11 years of age. He was 7 years older than I and was driving for a Curia Cos. So Goodwood means more to me than almost anything else. And I also got my first ride in a single-seater car with Ken Tyrrell here at Goodwood. He took me down here to see if I was good enough to join his team. And I hold the lap record at Goodwood, 1 minute 20.4 seconds. Of course, that was in 1966, the last time a Formula One car drove here, and Jim Clark was alongside me on the grid. So Goodwood's got so many memories, but today, what Lord March, now the Earl of Richmond, has done here is unique in the world. There is nothing that even closely comes to be as good as Goodwood Revival. Quite remarkable, a collection of cars, the people, the trouble that people go to dress in pre-66. I love the girls with the seams up their nylons. No, I'm very happy.
Everywhere you turn here at Goodwood, there's a historic photograph of the circuit in period. Have you got some of those pictures at home reminding me of the good times?
And their autographs. I've got the autographs of Fangio, Gonzalez, Ascari, Farina, Stirling Moss, Mike Hawthorne. One of my treasures. I was 11 years of age when I started collecting my autographs. And it's quite nice. You can actually read the autograph. You know who it was. Nowadays, everybody, scribbles. So therefore, my memories go way back. I never thought I was going to be a racing driver, but I was very enamored by the sport.
And it's still very much with all of us here this weekend today. Jackie Stewart, thank you so very much. Great to see you here. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you very much indeed.
Fabulous to hear then from three-time Formula One world champion Sir Jackie Stewart, who tested that Cooper Formula 3 car here prior to dominating the season in 1964, first year of the 1 litre Formula 3 class. Doug Nye is alongside me in the box, and Doug, you were here and saw Jackie race many times in period.
I did. I regret to say, from one viewpoint, you know, an advancing age, but it was a fabulous sight, and it was just so obvious that here was a meteoric new talent, and so in fact Jackie proved to be, with his 3 World Championships and everything else that he achieved in his long racing career.
Yeah, so much more off circuit, which is incredible. But here today, he's joined the celebration for Rob Walker. And Rob Walker's name, synonymous with the greatest batsman that we ever saw here at Goodwood, Sir Stirling Moss. He had the best batting average of anybody by a very long margin.
He did indeed. I went to see Stirling last week, actually, and he still looks very well. It's quite amazing how well he looks, considering the other difficulties that he's experiencing with his lovely wife, Lady Susie.
But he won so many races here in period, didn't he? He won the TTs. He just dominated TTs.
Sterling was a winner here from the day that he first ran here, as we know, in the inaugural meeting in 1948. But the two 250 GT short wheelbase cars that are now absolutely engulfed by people down on the grid. But they're on about row 4, is that? Row 5?
So hidden by the GRRC members, celebrating 20 years of the GRRC.
Yes, now as I was saying earlier, the GRRC grew out of the Goodwood Supporters Association, which itself grew out of very vocal opposition from a local group that was trying to stop redevelopment of the race circuit. And most of those people, I can sympathise to a large degree with them, because they bought their houses after.
When Grand Prix racing began in 1906, its creators saw it purely as a great battle between major manufacturers. Few suspected that a private owner would ever be so well organised as to beat the factory rivals. Today we pay tribute to a man who did just that, and who became the most successful private owner in the history of Grand Prix racing. His name was Robert Ramsay Campbell Walker, Rob Walker for short. And his cars would win not just one World Championship Grand Prix, but a record-setting 9 of them. Rob's impeccably prepared cars added more victories in lower grade events all around the racing world, from Aintree in northern England to Auckland, New Zealand. And they also, of course, won right here at Goodwood. Rob Walker's hallowed racing colours were dark Scots blue to reflect his parentage as heir to the Johnny Walker whisky family, with a contrasting noseband in white. Rob cut his teeth right here in the early 50s as a budding private owner and entrant. First with his friend, Major Tony Rolt, driving his Delage ERA, and then a very successful A-Type Connaught. And it was here, during a test session early in 1957, that Roy Salvadori tried Rob's early prototype rear-engined Cooper Formula 2 car. Roy was so impressed by the little car's handling that he suggested fitting a slightly larger Climax engine to enter the Grand Prix arena. In particular, Roy said, such a small car with more power would be perfect for racing round the houses in the Monaco Grand Prix. Rob's enthusiasm was fired. He had just such a car prepared, with a 1960cc engine to face the full 2.5-litre Formula One establishment. And at Monaco 1957, Jack Brabham ran third, before eventually pushing the car home 6th after its fuel pump fell off. A few months later, at my grandfather's September 1957 race meeting, the association began, which would catapult RRC Walker Racing right to the top of the Formula One pile. Rob told the story like this. At Goodwood, Tony Brooks was driving both my Formula 2 Cooper Climax and my undersized 1960 F1 car. Al Francis, formerly Stirling Moss's mechanic, was now my head man, and Stirling asked me if he could try the Cooper. He took it during the last half hour of free for-all practice, amongst small MGs, saloon cars, and heaven knows what. Stirling did one warm-up lap, then a flying lap. He was weaving in and out of the traffic, and he broke the lap record. I think he was impressed. I certainly was. He suggested that he might drive an F2 car for me during the 1958 season, while he was already committed to Vanwell for Formula One. Rob didn't think twice. He accepted immediately. When an Argentine Grand Prix was added at short notice to open the 1958 World Championship and Vanwell had no cars ready, Stirling asked Rob if he would run the little 1960cc Cooper instead. Rob agreed, and in the most incredible David and Goliath act in motorsport history, Stirling won outright, beating the factory Ferraris. That historic victory, 60 years ago, was the first Formula One win for a rear-engine car. The very next World Championship round was the Monaco Grand Prix, and remarkably, Rob's team won again, driven by French veteran Maurice Trintignant. The Cooper absolutely shone around the streets of Monaco, completing the job which Jack Brabham had begun 12 months earlier. Vanwell withdrew from racing at the end of 58, so Stirling joined Rob full-time from the start of 59, and the Walker-Moss partnership flourished, despite the lack of a written contract, relying purely upon a handshake, something Stirling reminded me of just last week. They became truly lifelong friends, Stirling always addressing Rob as Ram after the entrant's middle name, and they both relished being the underdog, tweaking the nose of the big manufacturers. Rob did all he could to ensure that Moss had the very best equipment, and when blocked from acquiring the latest models because leading manufacturers were afraid of being beaten by a team of privateers, Moss the maestro more than compensated. Over the next 3 seasons, there were 6 more World Championship Grand Prix victories, including landmark wins in Monaco in 60 and 61. And here at Goodwood, of course, Moss won the 1960 and 61 RAC Tourist Trophy in Rob Walker liveried Ferrari 250 GT short wheelbase cars. And yet another truly pioneering Formula One race win followed in the 1961 Alton Park Gold Cup. Moss driving the Walker liveried four-wheel drive Ferguson P99. Not only was that the first and still only F1 race for a four-wheel drive car, it was also the last for a front-engine car design. After Stirling's frontline career was ended so sadly here on Easter Monday, 1962, Rob continued in Formula One with such drivers as Maurice Trintignant, Joe Bonnier, and eventually the tough Swiss ex-motorcyclist Joe Siffert. Seppi Siffert scored Rob's 9th and final Grand Prix Épreuve victory in the British Grand Prix at Brands Hatch in 1968. Rob Walker was a lovely man, a truly sporting gentleman. He was a great friend of my grandfather, Freddie, and I remember him well from his visits to Goodwood. He graced the motor racing scene all his adult life, save for the war years when he served as a pilot in the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm. And that was despite his having been banned from flying for life as an undergraduate after zooming around the Newmarket horse race course, taking all the jumps in his de Havilland Moth. He spent generously but extremely wisely to build around him a wonderful team, a superb racing operation, and we remember him now with enormous respect and very, very, very great affection. Thank you very much indeed.
Rob Walker, as is summed up in his passport, under profession it just says gentleman, and really there's nothing else you can say.
Ian went on first, and he was did the 4 till 8 stroke, and I thought, you know, sort of cocktail time. So I put on a dark blue lounge suit with, well, I had trousers like this, and with a pinstripe.
And then what happened later on? Did you stay in that suit all day?
Then Ian came on again at midnight, and I came back at 4 o'clock, and it was getting dawn by then, so I thought the Prince of Wales's stripe was more suitable, and I wore that until the end of the race.
He would really leave it to me. He would give me signals telling me what the thing was, so I could read what the race was from in the cockpit. And I knew what all my instruments said, and I knew exactly what the tyres were like and how the car felt. And he left me to interpret his signals as to what I wanted to do. And this worked out extremely well, because I happen to be the sort of person that enjoys doing that.
In August 1917, the First World War still had a year to run when Robert Ramsay Campbell Walker was born, heir to the Johnny Walker whiskey family, and he grew up in his parents' 100-room country house at Sutton Veny, near Warminster in Wiltshire. In 1924, aged 7, on a family holiday in France, he was taken to see the motor races in Boulogne. Rob was absolutely hooked and would remain besotted with motor racing for the rest of his long life. In 1939, he and his friend Ian Connell drove his Delahaye into 8th place at Le Mans. Rob would also win a handicap race at Brooklands before the war years engulfed him. He joined the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm and married his wife Betty in 1940 after promising he would never race again. In fact, he had little expectation of surviving the war, never mind just another motor race. During the 1950s, Rob became not only a wonderfully well-organised, highly professional private entrant, but the best in the business, and by far the most successful. In Rob's cars, Stirling began winning Formula One races in 1958 at the Argentine GP, and at the height of his powers in 1960-61, Stirling won 2 consecutive Monaco Grand Prix and also won a stupendous German Grand Prix at the mighty Nürburgring. And in a new Lotus 49B, Joe Siffert returned Walker Racing to the top of the Formula One world by winning the 1968 British Grand Prix at Brands Hatch. For 1971, Rob's long career as an independent private owner was over. He backed John Surtees' new Formula One venture, and later would prolong his lifelong love of the Grand Prix scene as a hugely respected race reporter for the American magazine Road and Track. And of course, Rob's bond with Goodwood remained close. His winners here were Tony Rolt, Tony Brooks, and of course Stirling Moss. After our circuit closed in '66, the team still tested here into 1970. On the world stage over a 10-year period from 1958 to '68, the proudly independent Walker Blue won 9 World Championship qualifying Grand Prix and some 40 more minor Formula races, plus their 2 Tourist Trophy wins right here at Goodwood, backed up by Stirling's other Walker Ferrari victories, both in England and the Bahamas. As always, gentlemanly Rob might remark, with that slow, tolerant smile, "Not too bad, really, for a private owner."
What a touching tribute there from His Grace the Duke of Richmond and Gordon, and that splendid flashback of the great Rob Walker's racing career. That summed it up most beautifully and eloquently as ever, and the cars now on the grid really tell their own stories. So Doug Nine's alongside me, and we heard there that Tony Rolt, Tony Brooks and Stirling Moss were winners in Rob Walker's cars. Couldn't have a finer selection of them here. It's pretty much everything in the collection, isn't it?
Well, yes, we have a great cross-section here. The little A-type Connaught that we were just looking at alone in 1953, I think, won 16 races for Rob and really established him as a serious private entrant. But it was really the Cooper development and his sponsorship, effectively, of putting ever larger Climax engines in the back of these little Formula 2 cars. They set out as 1.5 litre cars, and that first Argentine Cooper, which is here today, that has been brought over by our friends at the Collier Collection, or the Revs Institute as it is now, in Florida. That little car had a 1,960cc engine, And on the front row there, you can see Rob's Delahaye, his early Bugatti, and the A-Type Connaught, the Formula 2 car, which was 2 litres on supercharged in those days, back in the early 50s.
But the Climax engine was another fabulous thing, wasn't it? There's the four-wheel drive Ferguson P99. And much of the development of that car done by Tony Rolt. Tony Rolt's son Stewart is its owner these days, and he's going to drive it in this demo, which is absolutely lovely. Stirling won the Alton Park Gold Cup in it, aided by some most suitable weather.
Yes, that Alton Park Gold Cup at the end of '61 was not only the only Formula One race thus far that's been won by a four-wheel drive car. It was also the last ever won by a car with the engine ahead of the driver.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. And as I say, there's no such thing as bad weather, just inappropriate clothing. And on that day, the best clothing was a four-wheel drive Ferguson. Clearly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing thing. We've got Coopers, we've got Lotuses, and the Walker colours. I mean,
sorry, Marcus. This is Jackie Stewart about to climb in to the little Cooper, the little 1960cc Cooper, in which Stirling won that 1958 Grand Prix. And I actually found that car in an estate house garage in Sydney, Australia. And it was acquired by by Miles Collier for his collection in America, and was restored absolutely to Argentine form, as you see it there.
It's absolutely stunning. Was it on the Doug Nye sort of grand tour? You sort of a three-year progression around the world, seeking out derelict racing cars.
Well, it does happen from time to time. During that Argentine Grand Prix, it was a most extraordinary race. On the opening lap, Stirling found that he couldn't change gear. The thing was jammed in gear, and a stone or something flew up and lodged in the interlock mechanism on the gearbox. He thought it was all over, but then suddenly it cleared and he drove on for the race. And as you know, Marcus, he went through the whole race non-stop on the same set of tyres.
Canvas and bits and pieces hanging
and they
out.
weren't proper racing tyres,
No.
They were Continental tyres, and he wore them through to the canvas and saved them to the end.
Absolutely brilliant. Almost kind of sleight of hand, just perfect. And that really summed Stirling Moss's driving ability up. Not only was he lightning fast, but he was able to conserve his machinery at a time when these days Formula One cars are so incredibly reliable, aren't they? They tend to run and run and run if they're not knocked off on the first corner.
The reliability of the modern Formula One car has removed some of the drama, I must say.
Some of the interest, I suspect, as well. But these days, if you're not in one of three teams, it's hardly worth turning up on Sunday afternoon. But in the old days, the unreliability, even in the Cosworth era,
it's nowhere near as good as it was in my day.
Yes, we're both looking through rose-tinted spectacles, but
Yes.
with good reason, I suspect.
They're in the shot on the big screens right now. You can see the 2 Ferrari GTs sitting there.
Yes.
The 1960 car, Ross Brawn's car, is there on the left with the bumpers, and it
Yes.
has a radio aerial, as you can see. And the other car, Clive Beecham's today, is the car that is running without bumpers, and that's the way you tell them apart photographically if you're going through, because they're both Walker Blue, they're both 250 GT short wheelbase Berlinetters, and they're both number 7.
And I think you'll find the stripe, the transverse nose stripe, is slightly closer to the headlights on one of them.
I've never put a ruler to it.
You can see that from that distinct picture there. No, absolutely fantastic. And those were entered by Rob Walker and Dick Wilkins, weren't they? Tell us about Dick Wilkins.
R.S. Wilkins was a very interesting enthusiast who had a car built for him before the war that was based on a big Bugatti engine. And it was called the BHW, and it had loads of power, and it was horrible to drive, apparently. And it became something of a failure. But R.S. Williams went on to become a great friend of Rob's and helped financially with some of these purchases.
Just brilliant. And we forget you and I probably don't forget, but many people forget that Stirling scored the first Grand Prix win for Cooper, for a rear-engine car,
Indeed.
world champion. First Grand Prix win for Lotus, first Grand Prix win for Coventry Climax engines, etc. So he was pioneering the way.
And all in Walker-coloured cars.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we said there's a Walker down there, a Walker-coloured Cooper, the 1958 Monaco Grand Prix winner. So the Walker cars won in 58, 60, and 61 there at Monaco, and we've got the 61 winner down there as well, the Lotus 18, which sits alongside Frank Lyons' ex-John Love Surtees down there, the TS9. Actually, that was a Team Gunston car in the period, but it's painted in those Walker colours and has been for many years now. So they're away now, led by Robbie Walker, Rob's son, in that 1939 Le Mans contending, 8th at Le Mans in 39, Delahaye 135 with the Kotal electric gear change, which is rather fascinating.
Yes, Rob was still in his larrikin days, really, when he had the Delahaye 135, and at university he tried to win a bet by proving that with that Kotal electric gearbox you had a separate lever that selected forward or reverse, and you had the same number of gears both forward and reverse, and he tried hard to demonstrate that the car would do over 100 miles an hour in both directions, forward and reverse. He got it up to about 40 miles an hour in reverse, and the steering geometry reversed and toppled him over into a ditch.
Oh dear. The absolute ace at reversing in Formula One cars was Gilles Villeneuve, who once reversed, ironically, through the paddock at Zolder on the mirrors in his Ferrari, doing about 45, 50 miles an hour, which was
I would believe
viewing.
Anything of Gilles Villeneuve.
But it's Rob Walker who's in focus today, and the Connaught, local car from just up the road in Send in Surrey, the Coopers from Surbiton in Surrey, part of that kind of triangle, sort of
all on the A3, all on the A3 road.
Yeah. HWM just nearby.
The A3 was a great artery for British motorsport and for its development during that period. There's the little Argentine Grand Prix car with Jackie driving
with that funny little scoop underneath that you were explaining yesterday. Is a kind of a deflector.
Well, it's part of deflector, but it's actually gauze, that thing hanging down under the nose, and it was a stone guard to protect the bottom of the extended radiator. You could just see there it's got a bigger radiator than standard that protrudes below the nose.
And in those days, there was a water radiator normally with a separate sort of little edge which had the oil radiator in that as well. Oil cooler.
The point was that the Argentine Grand Prix was running that enormous heat, and towards the end of the race, Alf Francis, Rob's famous Polish, really, chief mechanic, stepped out onto the pit apron and held a wheel up and signalled to Stirling with the wheel, and the Ferrari team thought, right, he's run out of time, he's coming in to stop, so they relaxed. And Stirling kept on going to the finish, nearly wore the tyres right through to the canvas with white lines going around them. But he won the race, and Ferrari were absolutely dismayed. And you can imagine that the awful job that Amorotti, their team manager had, their team director, technical director had, with that phone call to Mr. Ferrari.
A painful post-mortem in inverted commas.
Oh, dreadful. dreadful.
Didn't tolerate loss very well.
No, and the factory Ferraris driven by Luigi Musso and by Mike Hawthorne, were blown back, and they were beaten by this horrible little bug of an English interloper.
But it was the way things were going to go, though. It showed the way, pointed the way, and in 1959 and 1960, Jack Brabham won 2 successive world championships in Cooper cars, and the tide had turned pretty much forever, with the exception, I guess, of that 1960 Italian Grand Prix that was won by a front-engine Ferrari. But it was a bit of a sort of a short-changed win, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's the Walker Special there. Very interesting car.
Has a Tech-Mech type number, doesn't it?
Yes. And that is the 1963 Cooper Climax with a V8 engine that was driven for Rob by Joachim Bonnier, the great Swedish driver, after Stirling was in forced retirement.
And Bonnier had won that first Grand Prix for BRM in '59 at Zandvoort with a Type 25.
Yeah, the only Grand Prix he ever won, actually.
We're going to see a couple of Type 25s racing today, because I know that Rob's Lamplow has dusted his down overnight.
In this shot, that rather podgy number 7 is the Intercontinental Formula Lowline Cooper that they operated in 1961. And Stirling won in a Lotus 21.
The Intercontinental Formula essentially allowed the use of the old 2.5 litre Grand Prix engines, which were now defunct. So 1.5 litre Formula.
But that car, Stirling had won one of the Tasman races in New Zealand in the Lotus 21. And people were saying, well, that is because of the Lotus. So for the Warwick Farm 100 in Australia, immediately afterwards, he drove that Cooper instead and still won.
Well, talking of Warwick Farm reminds me, in Australia, the Victorian Historic Racing Register's meeting is happening as we speak. And a big welcome to Ron Simmons and all the guys down there in Oz who are enjoying the Goodwood Revival for 2018, its 20th anniversary revival on live streaming. So that's the Victorian Historic Racing Register, who organised the wonderful events, the annual classic at Phillip Island.
Yeah. The GT40, that was a Rob Walker entry that was picked up by Ford for Le Mans. Ford wanted to pack the entry with as many private owner Ford GTs as they could, and Rob had sufficient respect for the ACO, the organising club at Le Mans, to give him an entry. And the Ford ran there, driven by Bob Bodden-Jorrent and somebody else whose name I forget. But it did not survive the race, unlike Rob's Delahaye back in 1939.
Indeed.
And 22 there, Adam Lindemann with the Lotus 18.
Yes, super. That has the side panels on today. It didn't have when it won the Monaco Grand Prix in 1961, Doug.
That's right. There was an incident at Monaco on the starting grid where Stirling realised that a chassis tube was cracked, which was not unknown amongst Lotus products, and sometimes Cooper too, actually, despite their general robustness. But Alf simply wrapped the full fuel tanks, made in aluminium, in wet towels to keep them cool while he calmly welded the chassis on the grid. I don't think that would be allowed these days. We'll have to ask Ross when he comes in at the end of his laps with his 250 GT short wheelbase.
Not much on view, I wouldn't have thought, to actually get your gas axe out on, really.
The
Facel Vega there?
Yeah, the Facel Vega. Wonderful thing that Rob dealt in.
So it has a kind of a style all of its own, a bit kind of Jules Verne, isn't it? Bob Constantinos in that car, and yes, absolutely amazing. It was his uncle James Tilling who used to commentate here in period.
Yes, absolutely true.
Yeah. Bob goes to the Grand Prix to shout champagne, which of course Rob Walker would have thoroughly approved on.
No, it really, we were those of us who were budding enthusiasts during that period. It buoyed us up in many ways because we were seeing British cars beginning to win around the world and then beginning to win championships and then effectively becoming the dominant power in worldwide motor racing with so many manufacturers based here.
The times changed and it just became a works domain, didn't it? And just thinking on, the next real privateer was another Scot, was Lord Hesketh.
Yes,
with James Hunt. But what a wonderful tribute that was, and we look forward to seeing the Rob Walker cars out again tomorrow. It really does brighten up our day, and has always done so graciously here at Goodwood.